Hello everyone, Ben DeBono here. Just wanted to do a quick follow-up to last night's Game of Thrones. Really a few points I want to touch on after reading some other reviews and comments and stuff out there today, which I tend to do on Mondays. I just try and scan through a bunch of other stuff and see what other people are thinking. And there's some interesting things that I read today regarding last night's episode that I wanted to follow up on. So the first one, just really quick, is there seems to be a common theme where people are not enjoying the Arya and Sansa storyline in Winterfell, and I do not get that. I have plenty of complaints about this season, but that just seems kind of dumb to me. I mean, it's exactly what you'd want with the reunion. They've always, these two characters have never meshed well from the very beginning of the story, and so they come back together and it doesn't quite work the way that anybody wanted or expected it to work, and they're at each other's throats. And of course Arya's paranoid. I don't get the complaining about that part. I think, like I said, there's plenty of other storylines to have bother you about this season, but I'm in complete disagreement with most of the critics out there when it comes to the Arya and Sansa storyline. I think it's very, very good, and I like where it's going. Okay, what I wanted, the two other points I want to talk about are related to the seemingly huge logic holes in last night's episode. Specifically, this is your last spoiler warning if you haven't seen Beyond the Wall yet. The whole timing of the Ravens getting down to Dragonstone and Dany coming back in time to save them. And this was really bugging me during the episode because I feel like I said, if you watched our long review, I said I'm trying to work this season, but they're making it really hard. Well, it turns out that might not have actually been nearly as egregious as it seemed. I'll explain that in a second, but first I want to get to my second point I wanted to touch on, which is the idiotic defense of plot holes. That, thankfully, this is not taking place with critics, but it tends to take place quite a bit in commentary or comments on blogs and everything like that, which is that, well, you can accept a show with dragons and zombies. Why can't you accept a show that happens to play fast and loose with time? And this is just a really, really, really dumb approach to arguing this. This is not the way to defend Game of Thrones, because here's the problem with this, is that stories have work based on internal consistency. Okay? So just because there are dragons and zombies in Game of Thrones and there aren't dragons and zombies in real life doesn't mean that anything can happen in Game of Thrones. The world has an established internal consistency to it. Okay, there are still rules. They are just different rules than in our world, right? So in our world, zombies don't exist. In that world, they do. But just because they exist in that world and not in our world doesn't mean that Batman can show up in Game of Thrones. It doesn't mean Jon Snow can fly. It doesn't mean that Dany can shapeshift. It doesn't, there might be shapeshifters in Game of Thrones, but that doesn't mean anybody can just do it. Like, there's still rules. That's what internal consistency is. That's how stories work. And so you don't just get to defend bad storytelling by pointing out ways in which a world is different from our world. Now, there's all sorts of complicated exceptions to this. If we talk about more surrealistic stories, like if any of you are watching Twin Peaks, David Lynch operates in a very surrealist point of view, and so stuff might happen in his stories that would contradict, and it doesn't bother us the same way it would happen in a more grounded universe. But be that as it may, you don't get to defend plot holes just by pointing out that there happen to be dragons in the show. That's stupid, and that's a bad argument. Okay, so that being said, was the sequence of events last night actually a plot hole? I found this thread here. Let me pull this up. This is from the Free Folk subreddit, and it's a post called "Let's do the math on how long it would take a raven to get to Dragonstone." Now, I have not fact-checked everything they say here, but they have links, and so I'm just going to assume that it's more or less correct. So let's just read through this. It says, since there's been a lot of contention about the speed of the Raven and Danny, blah, 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 how long would all of this stuff take? So they start out with how long would it take Gendry to get to the wall from where they were attacked. Now, I've seen people complaining about this part. This part didn't bother me even last night for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's not really clear how far they did or did not travel to get to the White Walkers and the Arrowhead Mountain and everything. They were also going off of the Hound's dream or his vision of this hill, so it's possible that there could have been some wandering around. Remember, they're starting out at Eastwatch, so even though Jon has been north of the wall, he's not necessarily familiar with the geography here, so they might have covered a lot more ground getting to that hill than Gendry had to cover going back to the wall. Okay, so that part doesn't really bother me. As far as his finding his way, I mean, the wall's 1,000 feet high. There's got to be fairly good visibility. Like that stuff just doesn't bother me. Okay, so that point didn't bug me, but let's see what they have to say. So this person says, I don't think they traveled very far past the wall since it stated the Night King was already near Eastwatch to begin with. That's true. Not to mention that the journey for our heroes seems to take place within the course of less than a day, and no campfire, no nighttime. Well, I mean, it seemed like it was night or blizzard when the bears attacked, but okay, we'll say it was within a day or so. I think it would be reasonable to assume that the run back to the wall could have been done within 6 hours. Well, yeah, I mean, that's relatively unimportant. It didn't say half a day or something like that, okay? All right, so that part, fine. That didn't bother me. Gendry getting back to the wall fairly quickly didn't bother me at all, and I don't think it should bother anybody else. There's far worse leaps of logic that have taken place in the show than that one. Okay, so now we get into the biggies, which is how fast and how far can a raven fly? So this is a little trickier, I'm reading here again, since these ravens live in a fantasy world. See, that he's already resorting a little bit to that argument. This is a bad argument right there. We're going to assume, the rest of this post is good, but there's no reason to assume, based on the rules the world has established, that the Game of Thrones ravens are any different than our ravens, okay? And he kind of goes on with that. So he says, I think the best way is to think of them as like real-life carrier pigeons, which can travel up to 1,100 miles at an average speed of 50 miles per hour. That is fast. That is really, really fast. I had no idea ravens could fly that fast. So that kind of changed my mind about a few of my raven speed complaints from this season, because that is trucking it. All right. So ravens are fast, and they can go really far, 1,100 miles, without stopping. Okay? So what would that be? That's 12 hours? No. What would that be? I'm doing the math wrong. That's 22 hours to cover 1,100 miles. Right? All right, so then the question is, how far is it from Eastwatch to Dragonstone? There never seems to be a map that's particularly accurate, depending on what you read. So I went with this one, and then he links to a map, which means that they are 1,900 miles apart. Let's call it 2,000, since I'm sure ravens don't travel in a perfectly straight line. Okay, so fair enough. So 2,000 miles, it's still pretty far. So we established that's about 20 miles for half the journey. So this means that the raven could travel from Eastwatch to Dragonstone in 40 hours without sleeping or eating, drinking, giving it 8 hours worth of rest along the way, and that puts it at an even 2 days journey. I think that's fairly reasonable. Okay, so it's taking raven breaks along the way, but it's on its way to Eastwatch. Obviously, I don't understand how birds carrying messages actually works. That seems really implausible to me. But obviously it has happened in real life as well as in a fantasy world. So that part just doesn't make sense to me, but I'm willing to accept it. So that's entirely plausible. So 2 days from Eastwatch to Dragonstone. Now, how long would it take Daenerys to do the same journey? No idea, really. I can't find any solid info on how fast or how long dragons can fly. Yeah, this is I think at this point, we've already overcome the main objection for me, which was the ravens getting there. I'm assuming that dragons can go very fast. That makes it seems much more reasonable to me. So again, much like Gendry, where we don't have a solid data point, I'm willing to give the show any amount of leeway there. So, how long does it take Dany to do the same journey? Blah, blah, blah. This person says, let's say it takes another 2 days for her to reach our heroes near Eastwatch. Overall, this means a 4-day and 6-hour period. So 6 hours for Gendry, 2 days for the Raven, 2 days for Dany. So could our heroes possibly last that long on their little island? Well, we don't really have any way of marking the passage of time here, except that we know the whites had to wait until the ice around them froze hard enough for them to walk on. So, how long does it take water to freeze until it's thick enough to walk on? Well, according to a link about how that works, if we assume that north of the wall has an average temperature of minus 20 Fahrenheit, this would mean in 4 days, the ice could have gotten up to 12 inches thick in average conditions. According to the article, this means no snow and no clouds, both of which can reduce the ice forming process by half. Since there has been both snow and clouds at this time, this could mean that anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of ice were formed in 12 days' time. Now, is that enough to support the weight of a human being or white? According to another DNR website, hey, this one's from Minnesota about ice thickness. That is a concern because people go out ice fishing and you have to know if it's safe to drive your car out on the ice. It would take about 4 inches of ice to be safe to go ice fishing, 5 to 7 for snowmobiling, and 8 to 12 for various automobiles. Since we're talking about an army of the undead crossing the ice and engaging in open combat, I would be willing to assume that we would need at least 5 to 7 inches of ice required for snowmobiling, if not more like 8 to 15 required for automobiles. I'd say, yeah, that 5, 6, 7 seems right. All those bodies and jerky motions create a lot of stress on the ice. In conclusion, it seems to me that just over 4 days travel time required for Dany to receive the Raven and fly to Eastwatch seems to line up accurately with the amount of time it would take the ice to grow to support the army to get. Okay, so the one point he doesn't address there is, could they have survived the cold that long? And I don't know about that, but I'm willing to give the show that one too. So I actually thought that was a really good write-up. I mean, to me, the fact that it was only 4 days, the fact that the Raven could make it that far, this just seemed like a massive plot hole to me. It seemed like a bridge too far in terms of the logic that the show has played fast and loose with, and the geography and all of that this season. But I don't think it is. So this write-up really improved the episode in my estimation. I still think it's kind of a dumb plan in the first place to go and try and capture this white. But I'm also willing to wait and see how that plays out next week with the meeting with Cersei before I pass final judgment on it. This also doesn't necessarily solve all the problems with this season. There have been plenty of problems this season. But what it does do is solve what seemed like a huge problem with what was their big episode so far of the season. So I was pretty thrilled to find that out and wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, Ben and I will be back next week with the finale. Until then, goodbye.